Hi, my name is Harper Lee. I'm 23 years old, and I just graduated in environmental biological sciences at the University of Chicago. It should have been a day filled only with joy, a day when I could finally hold my head high after 4 years of relentless study, proud that I had at last proven my worth. My parents had spared no expense, renting out the luxurious rooftop of the Peninsula Chicago, where the city lights glittered beneath our feet. A small orchestra played classical pieces, and trays of delicate food were passed endlessly among the guests. Everything was flawless, so lavish it felt unreal, especially when only weeks earlier they had called me useless, the child who would never bring honor to the family. But then, in the middle of all that laughter and congratulations, I saw something that froze my heart. When the server set a pre-mixed cocktail in front of me, my eyes caught a quick, almost instinctive movement from my mother, Victoria Lee. Her diamond-ringed hand tilted slightly, and I saw strange white powder slip neatly into the clear liquid. It happened in an instant, the kind of moment anyone else might have missed, but I didn't. In a flash, my blood turned cold. They had planned this. My own mother, in front of everyone, was trying to destroy me with the same hands society praised as those of Chicago's philanthropic lady. I couldn't tremble. I couldn't let it show. I picked up the glass, smiling at all the faces waiting for the perfect cheers moment. Then, while every eye was still on me, I turned gracefully and handed the glass to Sophia, my sister, the shining jewel my parents always adored. "You deserve this more," I said lightly, almost teasing, and Sophia beamed, lifting the glass and drinking without a second thought. That night, beneath the glittering lights of Chicago, I realized the terrible truth. My own blood family were the very people trying to destroy me. Before I continue, I want to pause and ask you something. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. And let me ask you too, have you ever had to stand up for your own worth, even when the person hurting you was your own family? I was born and raised in a family that the outside world loved to call Chicago's perfect model. My father, Richard Lee, was known as one of the most successful pharmaceutical businessmen in Illinois. The CEO of Lee Pharmaceuticals, a corporation the press never stopped praising as the pride of America's pharmaceutical industry. He appeared on the cover of Forbes, spoke at lavish conferences, and was invited to lecture on business strategy at prestigious universities. But behind all that admiration was a man who was cold, calculating, and who never placed family above profit. To him, Sophia and I weren't daughters of his own flesh and blood, we were chess pieces, proof that he had built the perfect family empire. My mother, Victoria, was no different. She came from a prominent family, a lineage with generations in medicine. From a young age, she was taught that reputation, status, and elegance mattered more than anything else. She was the kind of woman whose magazine photos were always retouched to flawless perfection, the kind who demanded every public appearance leave people in awe. In her eyes, Sophia was the perfect continuation of the Lee bloodline, brilliant, graceful. A Harvard Business School graduate with outstanding honors, and swiftly rising into a management role at the company. At every party, every photo shoot, my mother introduced Sophia as the rightful heir of the family. And me? I was just Harper, the second daughter, never good enough in my parents' eyes. I still remember the first time I realized the difference when I was in elementary school. I had competed in a cross-country race and, to my own surprise, won a silver medal. I rushed home, thrilled, hoping my parents would be proud. But the moment I stepped into the living room, I saw them popping champagne, celebrating because Sophia had been chosen to perform piano at a community event. My father gave my medal a quick glance, then nodded and said, "Good, but don't fool yourself into thinking running will ever help your career." My mother didn't even lift her head from the dress she was trying on. From that day, I understood, recognition in this family would never be for me. By high school, the favoritism became undeniable. Sophia was the star of everything. She was debate team captain, a tennis champion, a straight-A student, and every time she achieved something, the whole family threw parties, posed for pictures, and saw her name in the local paper. The walls of our home were covered with Sophia's triumphs, from photos of her holding a tennis trophy to the framed honors letter from Harvard. And me? I got straight A's too. I won science awards too, but mine were tucked away in a drawer. I'll never forget the one time my mother actually attended one of my science fairs sophomore year, when I won first place in the entire state for my research on the impact of antibiotics on pond water. I waited nervously, desperate for her hug, her praise. But when they handed me the award and snapped pictures, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, "You look so sloppy. Like some stray child that doesn't belong here." Her words cut straight through me, killing the joy that had just begun to bloom. My parents never once asked me what I wanted. They had already mapped it out. Harper would study pharmaceuticals, join the company, work as a researcher to support her sister's leadership. Every other dream I had was nonsense. I told them again and again that I loved the environment, that I wanted to study the effects of industrial waste on ecosystems. My father dismissed it with a wave. "That's just for people who write useless reports. You need to do real work, to contribute to the family." When I got into the University of Chicago for environmental studies, he exploded with rage, threatening to cut off all tuition support. It was only thanks to scholarship aid, and later student loans, that I managed to hold my ground. I often thought I was born just to be Sophia's backdrop. She always stepped onto the stage bathed in bright lights, while I stood in the shadows, waiting for a glance of recognition that never came. I was called stubborn, ungrateful, while Sophia only had to smile to receive everything. That feeling etched itself so deeply into me that from a young age I believed I was nothing more than a shadow, an unnecessary piece in the Lee family. And the older I grew, the more I understood a bitter truth. In that house, love was never unconditional. It was tied to achievement, to whether or not you matched their expectations. Sophia matched them, and she was loved. I was different, and I became the thorn they wanted to cut out. My grandmother, Margaret, was the rare light in the otherwise dim, shadowed years of my childhood. While my parents dismissed and ignored my efforts, she was the only one who truly saw me. She wasn't just my source of comfort, she was an extraordinary woman. Decades before I was even born, she had been one of the most brilliant chemists in Illinois. She had won major research awards, her work paving the way for pharmaceuticals in developing new compounds for treatment. Ironically, it was her early discoveries that laid the foundation for what would later become Lee Pharmaceuticals, yet in every company history book, every glossy brochure, her name was nowhere to be found. I remember once she took me down to the old basement of her house and opened a dusty wooden trunk. Inside were stacks of research notes, written in her elegant yet strong handwriting. She told me those formulas had led to the very first pain relief drug that my father's company used to launch itself. "They took my work," she said with a sad smile, "and then erased my name from every certificate, every photograph, because I was a woman, Harper." Back then, people didn't believe women could stand equal to men in the lab. Hearing that, my young heart was both furious and aching. I asked her, "Do you regret it?" She looked at me, her eyes lit with a fierce spark. Because science isn't about glory, it's about serving people. But I do regret letting others decide my worth. Grandma Margaret was nothing like my parents. If my father saw everything only through the lens of profit and power, she looked at people, at future generations. She always told me, "Never let anyone tell you that your passion is meaningless. If you love the environment, follow it. If you want to fight, then fight. Don't become anyone's shadow, not even the shadow of this family." Those words became my compass, the thing that held me steady every time my father scolded me or my mother tore me down. What my parents didn't know until one day was that my grandmother had prepared a secret gift for me. When I was little, she often told me that one day I would be free, that I would have the strength to never depend on anyone. I thought it was just her way of comforting me. But in truth, she had quietly established a trust fund worth $10 million in my name alone. The conditions were clear. The money would only be released once I graduated from college or turned 25, whichever came later. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was the key to my escape from my parents' grip. I learned about it when I was 16, shortly before she passed away. She called me into her room, held my hand tightly, her eyes clouded by illness yet still glowing with pride. "Harper," she said, "I won't let you spend your life trapped in this cycle of injustice. Promise me, no matter what happens, you'll follow the path you choose. Don't let anyone buy you off or force you." At the time, I didn't fully understand, but I nodded. A few months later, she was gone, leaving me with a hollow ache that never left. My parents knew nothing about the trust until 3 months before graduation. During a company meeting about family finances and assets, the firm's longtime attorney, perhaps by accident, mentioned a special account managed by an independent group of trustees. He assumed my parents already knew and made a passing remark. But in that instant, I saw my father's face drain of color and my mother's eyes harden into a cold glare. After the meeting, they said nothing to me, but I knew the storm had begun. From that moment on, the way my parents looked at me was completely different. It was no longer mere contempt or dismissal, it was quiet hostility. They understood that if I received that inheritance, I would be completely independent. I wouldn't need the company, I wouldn't need the prestigious Lee family, and I might even have the power to stand against them. They were afraid because I was no longer just the defiant child. I had become a real threat. And I began to realize that the trust fund wasn't just an inheritance my grandmother left for me. It was proof that she believed I was capable of so much more, that she placed her faith in my integrity. While the entire Lee family's world revolved around power and money, Margaret entrusted me with something else, the responsibility to break the toxic cycle. And it was this secret, combined with what I uncovered about the company's toxic dumping, that made me a target. My parents didn't just want to seize back the $10 million. They wanted to protect the empire my grandmother had unintentionally built with her brilliance, but that they had stolen in name. And in their eyes, the only way to keep everything safe was to remove me from the game entirely. I discovered the company's illegal toxic dumping during my final semester at the University of Chicago, when I had the chance to join a field research project run by the Environmental Science Department in partnership with a local conservation agency. The study site was the Calumet River, a waterway cutting through multiple industrial zones on the south side of Chicago, long documented as being at risk of contamination. I chose the project not just out of scientific passion, but because I had an unshakable, almost instinctive sense that something there was waiting to be uncovered. At first, the work was routine, collecting water and sediment samples, bringing them back to the lab for analysis. Alongside other students, I measured pH levels, dissolved oxygen, and checked for heavy metals. But right from the earliest tests, I noticed alarming irregularities. Mercury and lead levels were far higher than the EPA's safety standards. The deeper we dug, the more disturbing the results became. We began detecting traces of pharmaceutical compounds, synthetic molecules I instantly recognized from reading industry journals. Typically, these substances only show up in untreated wastewater from drug manufacturing plants. When I reported my findings to my supervising professor, he nodded thoughtfully. "We've suspected this for a long time, but no one has ever had enough scientific data to prove it conclusively." In that moment, a thought echoed in my mind. I didn't dare speak aloud. Could it be that my own father's company, Lee Pharmaceuticals, was the culprit? In the weeks that followed, I quietly devoted more time to comparing water samples from different sections of the river. The current led me closer to an industrial complex on the west side, marked with a sign that read, "West Facility, Lee Pharmaceuticals." My heart pounded as I read those words. Everything I was uncovering seemed to point straight back at my own family. I started digging deeper. I searched through the facility's public reports on wastewater treatment, but the documents were filled with numbers that looked perfect, so flawless they were unbelievable. From my internship experience, I knew no process ever ran that smoothly. Something was being hidden. I secretly took photos, stored sample data, and recorded everything carefully in a private notebook. Day by day, the evidence mounted. In samples collected just outside the plant's gates, I detected dangerously high concentrations of cyclopentyl, a new compound not yet included in standard testing lists, but one I recognized immediately. It was the same experimental drug I had read about in the company's internal research documents. There was no way it appeared there by accident. It could only have come from Lee Pharmaceuticals laboratories. I felt my stomach twist into knots. On one hand, I was a scientist, driven by truth. On the other, this was my family, my parents' company, the place where Sophia now held a management position. If I went public, it would be like turning a gun on my own bloodline. But then I remembered my grandmother's words. Never let anyone decide your worth. If she were still alive, I knew she would want me to do what was right. That night, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at the stack of data. I knew with absolute clarity, if I stayed silent, thousands of people living along the Calumet River would continue to suffer the consequences. Polluted water doesn't just cause cancer, it mutates ecosystems, wipes out fish populations, and poisons generations yet to come. I couldn't close my eyes to it. I decided to confront my parents. During one of the rare evenings when we sat down to dinner together, I gathered all my courage and spread the printed test results across the table. I know what the company is doing at the West facility, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I have data, I have evidence. If you don't stop the illegal dumping, I will report it. The entire table fell into a deathly silence. My father slowly lifted his gaze from his glass of wine, his eyes sharp as blades. My mother pressed her lips tightly together, her hands clenched in her lap. Only Sophia looked shaken, her wide eyes filled with shock. Finally, Richard Lee spoke, his voice low and cold. You don't understand what you're saying, Harper. There are things bigger than you realize. This family survives because of silence. For the first time, I didn't bow my head. Silence isn't family, I shot back. Silence is complicity. From that moment, I knew I had stepped onto a path with no return. I began collecting everything: duplicate datasets, photographs of the samples, meticulous logs of time and location. I stored them all on an encrypted hard drive, just in case the worst happened. I knew my parents wouldn't let this slide. And I also knew that this decision, combined with the inheritance my grandmother left me, had made me the one thorn in the Lee family they could never pull out. A dark premonition throbbed in my mind. And just a few weeks later, that premonition became reality. After that confrontation, the atmosphere in my family shifted in a strange way. Before, every phone call and every weekend meeting had been filled with scolding about how my chosen field brought no value to the family, or how I refused to intern at the company. But only days after I dared to lay environmental data on the dinner table and declare I would report them, their tone changed completely. My mother started calling more often, no longer questioning my grades or pressing me about career plans. Instead, she asked what kind of flowers I wanted on the tables at my graduation dinner, or which dishes I liked so the chef could prepare them. My father even sent me a short text. Congratulations in advance. You've done something good. Reading those words sent a chill racing down my spine. My father had never once praised me in my life. This change didn't bring me comfort, it only made me more suspicious. They said they would throw a grand party on the rooftop of the Peninsula Chicago, where every glass wall opened to a sweeping view of the city. You deserve a celebration worthy of you, my mother said sweetly over the phone, her tone so sugary it felt fake. I forced a polite smile she couldn't see and replied, "Yes, thank you, Mom." But deep down I knew, nothing my parents did ever came without strings attached. In those final days before graduation, I buried myself in finishing my group's research files while also carefully preparing a plan to protect myself. I kept one copy of the environmental data at the university, another on my personal hard drive, and a third with my supervising professor just in case I happened to disappear. I told no one, not even Emily and Noah, my closest friends. I didn't want them dragged into danger. One evening, when I went home for dinner a few nights before graduation, I accidentally overheard a heated argument behind the door of my father's study. I was about to walk past when I froze at my mother's voice, full of worry. "Richard, are you sure this is necessary? What if someone finds out?" My father's tone was low and sharp. Don't you get it? She already has enough evidence. Add the inheritance on top of that, and she'll never depend on us again. She could bring the whole company down. My mother's voice trembled as she answered, "But she's our daughter." "No," my father cut her off. "She's a threat. The FDA has already begun a quiet investigation. If Harper speaks, we lose everything." I held my breath, my heart pounding violently. Every word landed like a hammer blow to my skull. Then my father's voice dropped lower, but still clear enough for me to hear. "The plan is just to make her sick for a few days. Get her hospitalized, and during that time we'll take care of the paperwork, cover the records. If the worst happens, if she dies before the trust is released, the money reverts back to us. That's the law." I stood frozen behind the door, cold sweat breaking across my skin. My own parents were plotting to poison me, the daughter they brought into this world. And it wasn't just about the $10 million, it was about silencing the truth I held about the West facility. In that instant, I wanted to storm in, to scream. But another voice inside whispered, "Number. If they know you've heard, they'll find another way, something far worse." I stepped back, forcing myself to return to the living room and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. That evening, Sophia sat beside me, chatting cheerfully about her work at the company. She asked if, after graduation, I planned to apply to an international environmental organization. I looked at her face, radiant, confident, yet so blissfully unaware of our parents' scheme. It struck me then. Sophia hadn't been part of that conversation. She was completely separate from their plotting. To her, I was still the distant older sister, but never the enemy. Watching her laugh, my chest tightened. Part of me resented her for being adored, for receiving unconditional love. But another part of me wanted to protect her, to make sure she never became collateral in our parents' power games. I knew that in just a few days, everything would explode, and I had to be ready. From the outside, the days leading up to graduation looked bright and joyous. But for me, they hung heavy like a black fog. My parents spoke gently, smiled often, but every word, every gesture reeked of falsehood. I carried a constant dread that the party they were planning wasn't meant to honor me, but to end me. And the most horrifying part was, I couldn't tell anyone. Not even the people I loved. Because anyone could get dragged down with me. That was when I understood the battle for my life had begun. And I, Harper Lee, would have to walk alone all the way to the truth. The night of my graduation party finally arrived. As I stepped out of the glass elevator leading up to the rooftop of the Peninsula Chicago, I was nearly overwhelmed by the extravagance that stretched before me. Golden ribbons of light wrapped around each column, banquet tables draped in pristine white linen stood adorned with imported orchids, and a small jazz ensemble played soft melodies that mingled with the delicate clinking of glasses. To outsiders, the scene was proof of wealth, a dazzling display of love from a powerful family honoring their daughter. But to me, every flickering candle felt like a flame waiting to consume my heart with its deceit. Most of the guests were familiar faces from Chicago's business world. I recognized my father's partners, sharply dressed executives, high-powered attorneys who had served our family for years, and even a few reporters from local financial magazines. Among the sea of strangers, only a handful of people truly belonged to me: Emily and Noah, looking slightly out of place in a rented gown and suit. They hurried to me, wrapping me in hugs of congratulations, and I forced a smile, silently grateful that at least I wasn't completely alone, that I still had people who genuinely cared. As I spoke with my friends, I could feel my parents' eyes fixed on me, never wavering for even a second. Their presence pressed on me like the weight of two hawks circling prey, watching every movement, every word that left my lips. Whenever I shifted my position, they subtly maneuvered to keep me within their line of sight. Their smiles stayed in place, but the stiffness of their lips and the calculating glint in their eyes told a different story. I had grown used to their coldness over the years, but tonight their gaze carried something more than control. It carried the stench of a plan. I caught a glimpse of my father leaning in to whisper something to Gerald, the company's longtime attorney. Gerald nodded, then glanced at me with the sharp, appraising look of someone assessing an item about to go up for auction. A shiver ran through me. All my life, that man had been my father's right hand drafting contracts, plugging every legal loophole, shielding the company from scrutiny. If he was here tonight, it wasn't just to celebrate my graduation. Sophia appeared at my side, smiling radiantly as always. She lifted her champagne glass and tapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Sis, everyone keeps asking me about your plans after graduation. Why are they so obsessed with that? Mom and Dad keep bringing it up over and over." I looked at Sophia and saw the innocence in her eyes, mixed with a faint trace of unease. She still didn't understand the truth behind it all. My chest tightened with a tangled rush of emotions, part anger at how she'd been endlessly favored, part pity for how she didn't see she was just another piece on our parents' chessboard. I forced a smile and said, "They probably just want to make sure I'll do the right thing for the family." Sophia frowned. "But isn't this your moment? Why aren't they asking if you're happy or what you want?" That simple question pierced me like a blade. I turned away, sipping my water to avoid answering. When I looked back, I caught my mother's stare fixed on me, her smile stiff as wax. She stood among a cluster of society women, her glass of wine shimmering in hand, yet her attention never wavered from my every move. She had always been a master performer in public, a woman of the people, as the press loved to call her. But I knew the truth. Behind that polished mask beat a cold heart, willing to sacrifice anyone, even her own daughter, to preserve her glory. I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Every sense in me was on high alert. I knew I was standing in the predator's arena, and I was the prey. The laughter and chatter around me faded into a distant hum, leaving only the pounding of my heartbeat in my chest. My mind flashed to the notebook filled with water sample data I had hidden away. As long as I was alive, that truth could still come to light. And maybe that was exactly why my parents had decided I had to be eliminated tonight. But I did not tremble. I had already overheard their scheme. I was ready. And I swore to myself I would not let them win so easily. The party had entered its most formal stage. Warm golden lights spread across the rooftop, glowing against the round tables draped in pristine white cloth, all arranged in a circle around the stage. The soft sound of live jazz drifted from the band in the corner, weaving together with the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. I glanced around. The guests were all there, business partners, a few journalists, and, of course, the family lawyer. Everyone waited for the moment to raise their glasses in honor of the Lee family's celebrated graduate, or more accurately, in honor of Sophia, not me. I sat there in the navy blue dress Emily had chosen for me, my heart uneasy. From the moment the evening began, my parents hadn't taken their eyes off me. Every movement I made felt as though it were under a microscope. Whenever I spoke with a guest, my father's eyes flicked toward me, then quickly shifted away as he leaned in to whisper something to the family lawyer, the silver-haired man with thin glasses glinting under the lights. And then, the moment I had dreaded finally arrived. My father rose to his feet, wearing that gentle smile, the same one that had fooled me into trusting him when I was a child, but that now only sent a chill down my spine. He clapped his hands, signaling the servers to bring out a luxurious wooden box. Inside lay a bottle of red wine, displayed as though it were a priceless treasure. "This," he began, his deep voice resonant with pride, "is a bottle reserved only for the most special occasions in our family. Harper graduates today, and her future shines bright. Nothing could be more fitting to celebrate this moment than with this rare and precious wine." The guests burst into applause. They laughed, raised their phones to capture this so-called warm family moment. I smiled too, though inside my chest, something ached sharply. I noticed it immediately. My father didn't let the servers pour as usual. He opened the bottle himself, and with deliberate care, filled each glass by hand. The glass was set in front of me. I tilted it slightly, and my heart clenched tight. In the deep ruby swirl, I saw it fine dust glittering faintly under the lights, particles not yet dissolved. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The words I had overheard the night before came rushing back. Just enough poison to make her sick, hospitalized for a few days, time to shift the assets. My throat went dry, but I kept my smile calm, unshaken. I glanced around. My mother pretended to chat with the women beside her, though her eyes never left me. My father raised his glass, waiting for me to follow. In that tense instant, I leaned ever so slightly and tapped Emily's hand beneath the table. She looked up and met my eyes filled with both a plea and resolve. My lips barely moved as I whispered, "Record this, record everything." Emily gave the faintest nod. Quietly, she slid her phone from her clutch, placed it on her lap, and with one discreet touch, set the camera rolling, angled toward the table. "To Harper," my father declared, his voice booming across the rooftop. Guests echoed the cheer, their clapping filling the air. I lifted my glass. Sophia, sitting beside me, smiled brightly, her face glowing with pride, with not a trace of suspicion. She had never glimpsed the dark side of our parents, never imagined they could harm their own child. My father's eyes flashed, urging me to drink. I drew in a steady breath, then turned suddenly to Sophia, my voice soft and affectionate. "My dear sister, today isn't just my day. You've been with me through all 4 years of college, encouraging me whenever I was weary. I want to share this joy with you." I smiled and handed my glass to Sophia. The guests clapped approvingly, believing it was nothing more than a sweet gesture of sisterly affection. "Oh, Harper, you're amazing," Sophia exclaimed, her voice brimming with emotion. She took the glass from me without a shred of doubt. I quickly lifted her glass, the clear, safe one, and brought it to my lips. In that instant, my parents went pale. The color drained completely from their faces. My mother stammered, half reaching out to stop it, but it was too late. In front of dozens of guests and the phones already recording, they couldn't do a thing. Sophia tilted her head back and drank in one long sip. "Delicious," she said with a carefree laugh, utterly unaware of what she had just swallowed. The music swelled again, the guests returned to their conversations, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents standing frozen. They forced smiles, clapped along with the crowd, but their hands trembled. The family lawyer bent low to whisper something, his own face betraying panic. I set my glass down gently on the table and smiled calmly. Beneath the table, I gripped Emily's hand tightly. The camera was still rolling, capturing the entire exchange, the glass switch, the flicker of terror in my parents' eyes. I lowered my head and whispered, just loud enough for Emily to hear. "The evidence is sealed. Now, they'll have to play by my rules." The rooftop buzzed with life. Jazz floated through the night air, blending with the chime of glasses, the bursts of laughter, the glittering lights reflecting off Chicago's towering glass skyline. I kept my face serene, though inside, my heart pounded so hard it felt as if it might shatter my ribs. I had just done something so daring I could hardly believe it myself. I had passed the special glass, poured by my father's hand, to Sophia. And now, all I could do was wait and see what would unfold. The first 10 minutes passed without incident. Sophia laughed brightly, shaking hands with guests, even boasting that our family was preparing to entrust her with bigger responsibilities at the company. I stood off to the side, quietly listening, quietly watching. Every time my parents' eyes flicked toward Sophia, I could see the tension behind their forced smiles, the tight press of their lips. They were afraid. I knew it. And then, about 10 minutes later, the change began. Sophia, who was always flawlessly composed, suddenly placed a hand over her chest. Her face drained of color. "Are you okay?" a friend asked as she swayed unsteadily. I'm just a little dizzy," Sophia murmured, forcing a fragile smile. But within a minute, cold sweat poured down her skin, streaking her makeup in dark trails down her cheeks. I held my breath. My heart clenched with a pang. No matter how bitter I felt toward her, seeing Sophia suffering like this still struck me with a stab of sorrow. But then the memories came rushing back, the times she had taken credit for my work, the times my parents defended her and cast me aside, and tonight the fact that our parents had meant this poison for me. My heart, it's racing too fast. Sophia gasped, before collapsing suddenly onto the floor. Screams erupted across the party. Guests stumbled back in panic, others shouted frantically for help. Call 911. Get an ambulance now, someone shouted. I rushed forward, kneeling beside Sophia. Strangely, I was calmer than anyone else. Amid the chaos, I leaned close to Emily and whispered, "Send the video now, back it up to the cloud, don't let it get lost." Emily nodded rapidly, her hands trembling but firm as she tapped on her phone, securing the evidence. The wail of the ambulance sirens cut through the Chicago night faster than I expected. Paramedics rushed onto the rooftop with a stretcher and emergency equipment. Sophia was laid down, her face ghostly pale, her eyes fluttering half shut. "She's struggling to breathe, heart arrhythmia," one medic shouted. "We need to get her to Northwestern Memorial Hospital immediately." I stepped forward, keeping close, my gaze steady, my voice clear and firm. "Wait. I have critical information. Tell the doctors this is very likely a toxin related to an experimental compound from Lee Pharmaceuticals, project code R17. The substance is called cyclopentylamine derivative 47. The paramedics froze for a split second. One turned to me, startled by the certainty in my voice. "Are you sure?" I nodded sharply. "I interned in the company's lab. I know the signs. If you don't alert them right away, the doctors will lose precious time." Without hesitation, the medic scribbled notes and relayed the message through his radio. I glanced at my parents. They stood frozen, their faces ashen. My mother stammered, her voice cracking. "Harper, what are you saying? Don't slander your own parents like this." I turned, my voice sharp as steel. "Slander? Everyone here saw it was father who chose that bottle. And soon, the doctors will confirm everything. If there's truly nothing to hide, then what are you so afraid of?" The air went silent. A few guests began glancing at my parents with suspicion. The family lawyer stood stiff beside them, sweat beading on his forehead, his mouth unable to form a word. The ambulance sped away. I started to follow, but Emily caught my arm, worry etched on her face. "Are you sure you want to go?" "I can go with you. The police will be here any minute." "That's exactly why I have to go," I replied, my eyes unwavering. "If I'm not there, they'll twist the story, make me out to be the liar. I have to be the one to speak the truth first." At the emergency room of Northwestern Memorial, chaos reigned. Doctors and nurses swarmed around Sophia, inserting IV lines, attaching heart monitors. The screen showed erratic spikes, her heartbeat in complete disarray. One doctor frowned at the test results. Signs of chemical poisoning. Likely an industrial compound. I stepped in immediately. It could be R17. An experimental compound suspended because it caused arrhythmia and respiratory failure. Lee Pharmaceuticals studied it 2 years ago. The doctor's head snapped up, startled. "And how do you know this?" "I've been secretly investigating their lab for months," I answered firmly. That's why, the moment Sophia started sweating cold and her heartbeat went erratic, I recognized the symptoms instantly. This isn't random, it's the classic reaction to the experimental compound cyclopentylamine derivative 47 from Project R17. The doctor nodded sharply and gave the order. "Prepare the experimental antidote protocol for cyclopentylamine derivative 47. Hurry." 2. Just then, the police arrived. 2 officers stepped in and immediately requested statements. "There is suspicion the victim was poisoned. We need information." My father pushed forward, his voice harsh. "This is a private family matter. My daughter only had a drop in blood pressure. There's no need for police interference." But the officer cut him off firmly. "The doctors have confirmed signs of chemical poisoning. This is now a criminal matter. You and your wife will need to cooperate." Every eye in the emergency room shifted toward my parents. They tried to hold steady, but the tremor in their hands betrayed them completely. I leaned toward Emily and whispered, "It's begun. They won't escape this time." Sophia remained unconscious, but with the emergency antidote, her vitals slowly stabilized. The doctor turned to me, his voice unwavering. "Your information saved her life. Without it, we would have lost critical minutes." I nodded silently. Inside, I felt both relief and bitterness. Sophia had been saved, but the truth about my parents' their plot to poison their own daughter was now out in the open. I knew this was only the beginning. But at least tonight, the balance had shifted. The one who was meant to be the victim was now the one holding the truth and the evidence. While Sophia lay motionless in the intensive care unit, I sat waiting in the stark white hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights glaring down on my tense face. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls from the police, calls from lawyers, even reporters. News of Sophia's collapse, suspected poisoning at the Lee family's lavish graduation party had already spread through Chicago like wildfire. Within just 24 hours, the FBI was officially involved. I knew the reason wasn't only the poisoning, it was the trail leading straight to the experimental compounds inside Lee Pharmaceuticals' labs. I could still see it clearly. The way my parents whispered with the family lawyer, the way their eyes tracked my every move at the party. My gut told me this was never just a family dispute, this was a conspiracy. So when the FBI and Chicago police stormed Lee Pharmaceuticals headquarters with an emergency search warrant, I wasn't surprised. Box after box of files, hard drives, and records were sealed and hauled away, as if the entire dark history of my family was being dragged into the light. It took only a few days for toxicology experts to confirm it. The compound found in Sophia's blood matched an experimental drug the FDA had already suspended due to suspected toxicity. What chilled me to the bone was that in every report the company had submitted to regulators, there wasn't a single mention of such dangerous side effects. Then came an anonymous email to the FBI from a scientist who had worked on the project. He wrote, "We were forced to alter the data. They made us hide the adverse reactions." I still have the original reports. I read those words again and again, torn between outrage and relief. Finally, someone else had the courage to speak. The FBI traced the lead and uncovered a hidden archive on the company's internal servers, troves of documents showing that top executives, including my own parents, had ordered staff to falsify numbers, erase lab animal deaths, and bury liver toxicity warnings. My hands shook as I flipped through the copied files. All the suspicions I had carried for so long were no longer theories. They were fact. But that wasn't all. The company's environmental division was exposed too. In a warehouse in Joliet, investigators uncovered crates of untreated toxic chemicals buried directly in the ground. The shipping records were forged to deceive the EPA. I thought back to the polluted rivers where I had taken samples, and fury burned hot in my chest. The video Emily recorded at the party was also submitted to police. On it, the camera caught the moment my mother discreetly slipped something into the champagne glass before my father handed it to me. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but the movement was unmistakable. Forensic testing confirmed that the glass contained traces of the same toxic experimental compound. Sitting in the interrogation room, my voice stayed calm but unyielding. My parents have always seen me as a thorn in their side. I refused to join the company. I refused to enable their corrupt deals, and that night, they didn't just try to ruin my reputation. They tried to ruin my life. The next day, the Chicago Tribune ran a bold front-page headline. Pharmaceutical CEO and wife charged with conspiracy to murder daughter, fraud, and environmental crimes. Photos of Lee Pharmaceuticals headquarters sealed with FBI tape flooded every news channel, becoming the symbol of the scandal. CNN, the New York Times all reported it. What began as a family tragedy had erupted into a national shockwave about corporate ethics and the moral decay of America's elite. Social media exploded. Thousands of comments called it the cruelest case of parental betrayal in a decade. A new hashtag spread like wildfire, numbered Justice for Harper and Sophia. I read the posts one by one, my hands trembling, my eyes wet. 9 months later, at the federal courthouse in Chicago, the trial officially began. The entire city's attention turned to the case. My parents, dressed in dark suits, sat at the defendant's table, their faces cold, as if they still believed they held control. Their defense attorney raised his voice. "My clients are being framed. This was nothing but an accident. Harper fabricated this story to destroy her parents and seize their fortune." I sat there, listening, my whole body cold and rigid. But the prosecution was ready. They presented the video, the toxicology results, the falsified documents, and testimony from the company's own employees. A map of environmental contamination lit up the screen, sending murmurs rippling through the courtroom. Sophia, still frail and not fully recovered, stepped up to the witness stand. I gripped my hands tightly, watching her trembling figure. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. I drank that glass of wine. Within minutes, I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die at my own graduation party. I don't want to believe it, but the truth is what it is. The courtroom fell silent. I saw a flicker of desperation flash in my father's eyes. He rose to his feet, his voice hoarse and broken. It was all a misunderstanding. My daughter is mistaken. We would never harm our own child. But at that very moment, the prosecutor revealed the final blow. An email my father had sent to the research division *. Eliminate all adverse reaction data. If not, this project is dead. *. In the end, after weeks of testimony and argument, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, document forgery, and gross violations of environmental law. The judge struck his gavel, his voice firm and resonant. The defendants are sentenced to long-term federal prison. All personal and corporate assets are hereby frozen. Lee Pharmaceuticals is placed under court supervision pending dissolution. The courtroom erupted with the sound of cameras clicking, keyboards clattering, and hushed voices buzzing. I closed my eyes as a single tear slipped down my cheek. Not out of pity, but because at last, the truth had come to light. Sophia and I, once dismissed, once nearly erased, now stood as witnesses to the complete collapse of an empire. When the trial ended, Chicago was still in uproar. The news ran every day: the Chicago Tribune, national television, every outlet. My parents' names were now forever tied to phrases like murder conspiracy, medical fraud, and environmental crimes. The pharmaceutical company once hailed as the pride of the city's economy was officially seized, its assets frozen, its future dismantled. The shadow they had cast over me for so many years, one I thought I could never escape, had finally crumbled into nothing. I didn't feel joy watching their downfall, but a rare peace settled in me. For the first time, I no longer lived in fear, no longer had to pretend I was fine under the weight of others' judgment. After the trial, I left my cramped downtown apartment and moved into the lakeside house my grandmother had left behind. The old wooden home, with its porch facing the shimmering waters of Lake Michigan, gave me back a sense of peace I hadn't felt since childhood. Sophia moved in with me too. After recovering from her brush with death, my sister, the one who had once stood silently on our parents' side, chose a different path. On the day she brought her things into the house, she looked at me with a steadiness I'd never seen before. "I can't go back to the company," she said. "I can't keep turning a blind eye to what happened. I'm applying to law school. I want to be an environmental lawyer. I want to use my work to protect those who don't have a voice." I looked at her, and for the first time, there was no trace of suspicion or resentment in my eyes. I understood that Sophia's greatest betrayal, turning her back on me, had only ever been born of fear. But now, she had chosen to stand up. We built a new life together in the lakeside house. In the mornings, we brewed coffee side by side, walking barefoot across the dew-drenched grass. In the afternoons, I poured myself into the greatest project of my life, the Community Support Foundation. With the portion of inheritance the court had rightfully returned to me, I chose not to keep it for myself. Instead, the fund was established to aid communities harmed by my family's illegal dumping, restoring water sources, providing medical assistance to those poisoned, and awarding scholarships to students pursuing law and public health. I knew that only action, tangible, lasting action, could truly heal, not just for me, but for the innocent lives scarred by the company's crimes. Sophia, meanwhile, threw herself into preparing her law school applications. Many nights, I found her hunched over the small wooden desk, eyes red with exhaustion, yet still writing line after line. One night, she looked up at me, her voice steady with conviction. I wasted too many years in silence, but from now on, I'll turn that silence into strength to protect others. I smiled softly, answering, "That's the best way to atone, not for me, but for yourself." We were no longer two children vying for scraps of our parents' affection. We were allies, bound not by blood, but by respect and trust. A new kind of family. Time moved on. Invitations began arriving for me to speak at international conferences on corporate ethics and social justice. One crisp autumn morning, I stood in a grand hall in Geneva, facing hundreds of scholars, journalists, and activists. I wore a deep blue dress, the stage lights catching my face strong, yet gentle. When the microphone came alive, I began with a simple truth. I once believed family was everything. That blood would always protect blood. That parents would never harm their own children. But I learned a bitter lesson. Blood does not equal love. Real family is not defined by DNA, but by those who respect you, who protect you no matter who they are. The hall fell silent. I continued, my voice steady. My parents tried to poison me to preserve their power. They twisted the company my grandmother founded into an empire of greed. But the truth is always the strongest antidote. And when you have the courage to face it, you reclaim your freedom. Oh, 4. I looked out across the audience, into faces intent and listening, some with eyes glistening. Slowly, I went on. I don't tell this story to stir pity. I tell it so that anyone who has ever been hurt by their own family knows this. You are not alone. You have the right to step out of the toxic cycle. You have the right to choose your own family. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't watching others fall, it's living a life of joy, of success, of independence from those who once tried to destroy you. Thunderous applause rose up, rolling on and on. I smiled faintly. In that moment, it felt as if my grandmother were smiling too, somewhere in the hall, faint but strong. I kept working with the community foundation. Sophia received her law school acceptance letter. We had found our own path, no longer bound by the dark shadow of our parents. One evening, as the sun set over Lake Michigan, Sophia and I sat together on the porch, the breeze slipping gently through the wooden slats. I spoke softly, as if to myself, but also to the world beyond. In the end, the most precious gift Grandma left me wasn't this house, nor even the inheritance. It was her reminder that true love never comes with control or destruction. It can only come from respect and from protecting one another. Sophia squeezed my hand, smiling. And from now on, we'll protect each other. I looked at my sister, at the crimson glow of sunset reflecting across the lake, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Not just free from my parents, but free from the fear that had caged me all through my youth. My story ends here. But the message carries on. Blood does not equal love. Real family is made of those who choose to stand by you. And the truth, no matter how painful, will always be the strongest antidote.